Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to this eGMAT session on verb tenses. We are here to help you excel in verbs using the storytelling approach. Before we get started, I would love to introduce myself. I am Stacey Trepanier. I am one of the verbal experts here on the eGMAT team. I am being supported today by Harsha, one of our subject matter experts, and a huge shout out to GMAT Club for hosting this today and giving us this platform to be able to work with you guys and explore how to solve these really difficult 700 level questions using verbs. So we are going to jump in. We're kind of on a time constraint today. There's another session that's going to be following us, so I want to make sure that we move through these questions. I've got 5 difficult questions to work you through. So let's jump right into this. The goal of this session is to demonstrate the application of eGMAT's cornerstone meaning-based approach using what I call the storytelling method. And what I mean by storytelling is that sentence correction and the sentences we see in the sentence correction portion of the GMAT are little micro stories. They're just the author communicating a small story to us. And the verbs are just the voice to express the events of that story. And we all know when we're telling a story, if we don't get the events in the proper order and expressed in the right voice, the story becomes very confusing. The events get mixed and muddled up, and it's hard to understand what is going on. So if we can get to that meaning-based approach and understand how to tell these stories and sequence the events correctly and use the right voice to tell this story, we can conquer verbs. It's really that simple. So we're going to look at all difficult questions today, and we are going to learn how to use the different tenses. We're going to deal with simple tense, past perfect, present perfect, all those really complicated tenses, and see how to tackle those just using this storytelling meaning-based approach. You don't have to conquer a ton of grammar rules to get your minds around verbs. It's really a very simple approach with that meaning-based approach. So a few housekeeping things before we get started. As I said, I have Harsha with me today. He is going to be posting the polls in the chat. You're going to click on the link to those polls, which will take you to where you're going to answer the questions. So we're not going to answer the questions in the chat. We're going to answer those questions in the polls, and then we will be checking those results and sharing those results with you as we go. The flow of the session today is going to be a warm-up. We're going to deal with some simple sentences just to get our brains started thinking about verbs and how verbs work in that warm-up, and we'll discuss those. Then we're going to go through a couple of sprints. So we'll have those 3 warm-up questions. Then we will tackle sprint 1. And then from sprint 1, we will do sprint 2. So sprint 1 is going to consist of 3 questions. And then after those 3 questions, we will tackle sprint 2, which will have 2 questions. There will be takeaways. So obviously, before we move into sprint 2, we are going to have a takeaway from sprint 1. And that takeaway is going to be our discussion. We will go through, we will solve this question together. We will have some fundamental concept discussions of that. And then we will use those learnings, and hopefully you will be able to apply those learnings to sprint 2. And then from sprint 2, we will have further takeaways. So as I said, we are going to put those answers in the polls and not in the chat. So I see some greetings from some of you in the chat. Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining me. Hopefully you guys are ready to get started. And I think we are going to move forward with the warm-up section. So I'm going to see if we can get Harsha to drop. Good morning. Hello, Manish. That first warm-up section poll in the chat for you guys. There it is. We are going to have you click on that link that has been dropped into the chat. And so the directions for the warm-up section, I want you to think about what the author is trying to express in these sentences. And you're going to tell me if the verb tense used is correct to express the same. Okay, so that being said, click on that link. I'm going to give you guys, we have about 3 warm-up sentences. So I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to answer that poll. I'm going to go ahead and mute my mic and turn my camera off during those 3 minutes. And then I will pop back with you and we will work through these sentences together. Best of luck. Okay, guys, about another minute and a half for those warm-up questions. If you're just joining us, go ahead and click on that link in the chat to tell me if those verb tenses in the warm-up questions are correct or incorrect. So let me give you guys about 1 more minute to tackle those, and then we're going to discuss those warm-up questions. We're going to discuss all the verb tenses once we go through these, so just hold tight. $30 seconds to lock in those final answers. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and have Harsha close that poll, and we are going to go ahead and get started going through these answer choices and exploring these tenses a little bit more. So hello to those of you that just joined us while we were solving these verb tenses. Let's explore these warm-up questions. Let me get to these questions. Okay, so this first question for the warm-up. The multicultural United States is a heterodox nation. So this one, we had a higher percentage correct. About 81% of you got this question correct. Now, what we need to ask ourselves when we are looking at this little story the author is being told is, what is the author's intent here? So the multicultural United States is a heterodox nation. So obviously the intent the author is trying to communicate here, or this small micro story that the author is telling us, is to express a fact or a characteristic of the United States, right? It is telling us a fact that the United States is multicultural and it is a heterodox nation. So when we express a characteristic or a fact that is a general truth about something that is universally known, our tense usage is going to be the simple tense, right? And in this case, this is a fact that is true for all time. It did not happen in the past. It is not happening in the future. It is a tense that is going to be true and is commonly known for all time. So here we are using the simple present tense correctly to express a fact true for all time. And that is a universal truth of this characteristic. So nice job here. 81% of you obviously know your simple present tense. Now let's take a look at warm-up number 2. Now this one, a little more challenging for you guys. This one, if I'm looking correctly, question 2, a little bit more challenging because of the use, and I saw some questions in the polls about had been, what usage is this? So question 2, more like 90% of you got question 2. So this actually had a pretty good accuracy rate as well. Victoria Woodhull had been the first woman to attempt to run for president. So 90% correct here. So nice job. Hopefully, again, you realize the author's intent is to express a historical fact, to tell us a story from the past. Now, historical fact, past information. So obviously Victoria Woodhull was the first woman to attempt to run for president. This had a hard stop in the past. There is no sequencing. When we use the past perfect, we are sequencing events from the past that are related. And we have no sequencing here. We only have one event. That Victoria Woodhull was the first woman to run for president. So we only have one event, and this is her first attempt to run. So we should have used this simple past here because we are stating one event in the past, and this event had a hard stop. She did this in the past. It is over and done with. So simple past tense to express this event in the past. Why not is Manish? Because it's over and done with. Okay, it's a fact that happened in the past. Her attempt and her run for president is over and done with. Yes, it's a fact that is true for all time, but it happened and it had a hard stop in the past. When her run was over, it was over and done with. So she was the first. She will always be the first, but that run for presidency had a hard stop date. So we can use the past tense there to express that hard stop date because we know that that event is over and done with. Okay, and we're not going to write has been because has been expresses more of a continuing action, and we don't want to express that continuing action because we know we have that hard stop date in history that is over and done with. And we're going to discuss more of that present perfect expression in a couple of more questions. Okay, so when we have an event that has a hard stop date in the past and we know that specific time period of when she made this run and when she made this attempt, we want to use that simple past tense. Okay, now let's take a look at this third question. This third question is a little bit more complicated, but still I'm liking the percentage we got here. We got 82%. Oops, sorry, my PPT jumped. We got an 82% accuracy rate here. And The intent here is a little bit more complicated. So we have the author talking to us about James Baldwin. Now, James Baldwin is a historical figure, and we have more of a story being told to us. We have this story being expressed of what has happened in James Baldwin's life. We often see this a lot when authors are telling us about people and the events of people's lives. So we see more sequencing, okay? So we have multiple events. And when we have multiple events, we have to ask ourselves, are these events related? Well, because both events are dealing with one person, they're occurring to one person, and they're happening on the timeline of one person's life. So we have this timeline, and this timeline is of James Baldwin's life. So whenever I see past perfect jump into a sentence, I always try to correlate a timeline to double check if everything's falling on the same timeline. So I'm going to check that. By the time he moved to Paris, so, okay, I have a move to Paris. So James Baldwin moved. So sometime on this timeline, James Baldwin moved to Paris. He had endured the cruelty of Jim Crow laws. Okay, so had endured. So this is telling me that this is the first event, and then he moved to Paris is the second event. Okay, so had endured would occur first on our timeline, and then the move to Paris would be the second event on the timeline, and that's a logical sequence. So the past perfect does work here. It is not illogical to say that Baldwin endured the cruelty of Jim Crow laws and then he moved to Paris, possibly to escape the cruelty of Jim Crow laws, okay? So for that situation, this is making logical sense, and the verb tenses are working out. So hopefully you checked the logical sequence of events in the story that the author is intending to communicate, okay? So I see a question for past and present perfect. Do they always have to have another time marker or a sequence of events? So past and present perfect are very different. Present perfect, we're going to use more when we don't have specific time markers and we want to express continuing events. Past perfect is what we use to help us sequence events. If we have clear time markers, we don't necessarily have to use the past perfect. So if we had like 1963 and we had a clear time marker, we wouldn't necessarily have to use the past perfect for that sequencing. Okay, then it becomes optional if we have clear time markers that are helping us sequence events. Okay, in that instance, the past perfect becomes optional. All right, so hopefully these basic verb tenses are becoming clear, and you can see how you kind of have to question the story the author is telling you, and you can see how you ask, well, okay, what's the intent of the story? What events are being communicated here, and what's the best way to tell the story, right? Am I expressing a continuing action? Am I sequencing related events? Or does my event have a hard stop in the past? And then from there, once you understand that meaning and what's being communicated, then you can figure out what verbs the author should be using, and you can spot those errors. So with you guys joining me today, we have some great free supplemental things this Saturday only to help you sort all through this. So this Saturday, you can jump on our site and get verb tenses. You can learn simple tenses, continuous tenses, your perfect forms of all the verb tenses, past, present, and future. You can take some practice quizzes, kind of get your feet wet, see where you are with your verb tenses, enhance your understanding, get personalized feedback on your ability to apply these basic forms, kind of really see where you're at, and start really that process of mastering these complex sequencing scenarios that GMAT is likely to throw at you, because verbs are one of the hardest concepts to get your brains around and to kind of conquer. So again, this available in the free trial till Saturday, June 5th. Okay, you can register for that free trial by clicking on the link that just popped up in the chat. We are going to get ready to start sprint 1. So if you just joined us or logged in while we were doing that warm up, we are going to put our answers in the polls. We are not putting them in the chat. So make sure that you keep your answers a secret for everyone as you're working through the questions. We don't want you guys sharing your answers in the chat. We want everyone to have the opportunity to work through these questions. So Harsha is going to go ahead and drop that link for sprint 1 in the chat. Go ahead and click on that link. We're going to give you about 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes for each question. So that's about, there's 3 questions, so that's about 6 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself, turn my camera off for that 6 minutes. I'll give you that 30-second warning once we see that the majority of you have got your answers locked in, and then we'll work through these questions. Best of luck. About 1 more minute. 1 more minute. I'm going to go ahead and give you all that 30-second warning just so we can keep moving through here. Okay, let's call time on this. If you're going to lock in your answers, please do so now. We'll say 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm going to go ahead and have Harsha lock that poll. And we're going to start discussing these questions. I see some of you thought these were tough. So let me clarify. These are all 700 level hard questions. So we want to do tough here. I want you guys to make mistakes here. I want us to work through these here, and let's have a lot of mistakes and learning. So this is a safe place to make them. So when you get to test day, those aren't the mistakes we're making. That's why we're here. So the teacher in me loves mistakes because that's when the best learning takes place. So no worries there. And Harsha is pinging me with some results right now, and it looks like some of you are actually doing better than you might think. So nice work. So let me get you guys moving. So our first question was on income taxes. Then we saw the vanishing species, and then we saw the phosphates question. So we're going to start with the income taxes, and 62% of you got this question right. But we're going to start with a fundamental concept to kind of take you into this thought process of this question, and then we'll go back to the question. So I want you to think about this sentence, and we're going to pop a poll in for you to answer this really quickly. I'm going to only give you like 30 seconds to answer this question. So nice job if you got 2 out of 3. That's a pretty good accuracy rate. But look at this fundamental concept, and I want to make sure that you're understanding why you're getting your questions correct, and make sure your verb tenses are in order. So choose the correct sentence here. 50 million people were killed in World War II. 50 million people have been killed in World War II. 30 seconds, go. Once we get the link in the chat, or you don't even need to click on the link, just think in your head, there's that link. Which one is correct? Sentence 1 or sentence 2? 30 seconds. Don't put it in the chat, you guys. It's supposed to go in the poll. You're not supposed to share your answers and influence each other. You're a naughty class. What can I say? All right. Good. 30 seconds is up. So let's take a look at this. What is the author's intent? Again, we see the intent is to express historical information, to express a fact. So sentence 1 is communicating that during World War II, which this is the new modern way of expressing World War II with this number. As a historian, it drives me crazy. It should be World War II. Here, I have to edit. There, I like the Roman numeral better. 50 million people were killed in World War II, okay? Past event happened, ended 1945. World War II was over, 50 million people were killed, totality. End date, we know when the treaty was signed. We know when the end happened. 50 million people have been killed. Now here, we've got this progressive action. This is the present perfect. This means over the course of time, continuing action. Have been doesn't give us that feeling of an end date, okay? That continues past that stop date of when the war ended. Therefore, sentence 2 would be incorrect, and sentence 1 would be the correct expression. Because we know World War II ended, because we had a hard stop date, the use of the present perfect would be incorrect here. We're expressing a fact, and we have a hard stop date. We would use the simple past tense for this universal truth. Okay, so again, check intent. What is the author's intent? To express fact, meaning, historical information, reasoning, we have a hard stop. We know a date. We know World War II is ended. We have a date that it ended. We know there's a hard stop. We know it did not continue. Okay, so that being said, let's take a look at question 1, because this fundamental concept is what you should have applied here. So, first step for the eGMAT approach is always to read slowly, use your pause points, and really extract the meaning and understand. We say spend 45 seconds to a minute on the original sentence so you understand what that author is intending to communicate. So as you read, partly as a result of Proposition 13, so I know I have this proposition that has taken place, which severely limits property tax increases. So that would be nice. Now I know what this proposition is doing, so I get that description. California has come more and more to rely on personal income taxes for its revenue. Income taxes have increased from 18% of the state's general fund in 1962 to 48% by 2002. Okay, so I know that I have a kind of raising of taxes. So anytime I get a sentence that gives me data and I have one point to another, I always like to sketch myself out on a quick note, like a little graph or something to help me really understand what's being communicated and understand how this data is working. So I know I have an increasing reliance on income taxes for revenues. And I know that I have my income tax, and then I have certain years that are taking place. And I have 1962 as my start period. And I know in 1962, that was 18%, okay? And then I know that that increased 2002 to 48%, all right? The sentence is giving me all of that data. So that is really, really clear. So now I need to check that I have my brain around these dates. I see how this increase is working. So I know this increase happened from point A here to point B up here. So from point A to point B, and I know that this is my period of time, and I know this is when it ended. That's why I have this data. So I have a stop date. Okay, so now I need to check my verb tenses, because obviously my author is telling me this story about, and yes, business has stories too. Data is just a representation in business terms of story. And so I get the story of this data. So how do I communicate the story of this data? Okay, so then the increase reached by 2002. So I have facts about the increase that happened over this period to support the first part of this sentence about the increased reliance on these said taxes. So these are all my main ideas, or what we call at eGMAT our key aspects, okay? And when I say key aspects, these are just like the main ideas or the key points of the sentence. And this is a skill you're going to do in SC. It's a skill. I'm sure Harsha gets you into a free session on YouTube. He'll talk to you about pulling main ideas. And RC, this is a skill you should just practice good general active reading, pulling your main ideas out and making sure you really synthesize what the author is communicating to you. And then once you have that, you need to ask yourself that really important question. Is the author's intent here to show continuity of action or a fact? Okay, so is the author, now I have increased here, so I'm going to start checking my verbs, okay? And we've got that poll that just popped in for you, so I want you to answer this question. We have increased here, and I know have increased shows continuity of action, and I do. I have movement here, right? I have from A to B. Is the intent to show continuity of action? Is my intent to show movement? Is that what the meaning here is? Is that the intent? Or is it to establish a fact that the data moved from A to B? Let me give you guys about 30 seconds to think about that, and then I'm going to discuss it. And these are decisions you have to make when you're checking. Okay? Check meaning, check the story. About 10 more seconds. I think both. They can't be both. We have to make a decision. We can't use both tenses. Can't shift back and forth. You guys are going to debate each other in the chat. I love it. I wish I had you all in a classroom. We could debate back and forth. Okay, so let's talk about this. If we're expressing data and we have 48%, I have specific data. In order to collect that data, I had to put an endpoint or a hard stop on that data in order to collect the information. So yes, we have continuity because it was over the course of time, but I'm expressing data that had a stop point. Thus, I have an endpoint that this data was collected, and I'm expressing this entire past period. So I'm expressing factual information of that period of time, and that period of time is now in the past. And as Manish shared in the chat, it ends in 2002. So we're now in 2021. So that period is way back. But even if I was the day after this data had been collected, it would still be in the past because the period is over. So now I am expressing a fact, and I would not use have increased because it is no longer continuing action. It is got that stop date. So we would be looking for, this would be an error in the sentence. I would need the simple past tense here. Okay, because I'm no longer continuing. I have that hard stop because I've collected that data and I have that endpoint of 2002. Okay, so that's where the verb tense error here is with our author telling this story. Anytime we have that hard stop and we know the date that it ended, we want that simple past tense. So have increased is incorrect. We are now looking for an answer choice that gives us the simple past tense. And 62% of you were able to get to this correct answer choice. So let's go through these and explore. So 62% of you landed down here on choice E, which is over half of you. So nice job. I'm super happy with that. So right away, if you were able to see have increased was incorrect, you would be able to move straight through A, B, and C. And GMAT is, and 67% of you recognize that it was a fact. So that is great too. That gives me confidence we're seeing those fundamental concepts are solidifying. A, B, and C, you could reject right away because of the fact that we have the present perfect used. And GMAT's great at getting us down to two answer choices, and which would be D and E. Now, D and E both use increased, right? Which is the simple past tense form, right? So the income taxes increased from 18% of the state's general fund in 1962 to 48% by 2002. Now, if you landed on choice D, if you were able to reconcile the verb, okay, and you picked increased here, because that is the correct verb, great job. You've got your verb straightened out. You always have to look for those secondary errors, okay, which in this case is that expression error increased from and the proper expression would be 2. They introduced were here, which the proper expression we need is 2, which we see used right here, to 48%. So we have an expression error with choice D, which is the reason we're going to eliminate choice D here. Okay, so choice E is indeed our correct answer. Were increased, I mean, yeah, that's simple past tense, so I guess were would have worked here. That's a helping verb, so it gives the same past tense voice. But that's not an option, so I always warn students, don't go with what ifs. We have to go with what we have presented. So shoulda, coulda, woulda, if it was here, we would have had to dealt with it. But GMAT will never introduce 2 grammatically correct sentences to you. There will always be one clearly correct sentence, and the other sentence, even if it has 2 correct verbs, we're going to have the introduction of another error, which we see here with the expression error. Okay? So hopefully the use and the difference between the present perfect and that continuing action versus the simple past tense is clear. Let's move on to the vanishing species question. This is one of my favorite questions because of the fact that it has such good imagery. Let's jump right into this. We have 500 million different species of living creatures have appeared on Earth. Nearly 99% of them vanishing. Okay, so you get such clear imagery here. You can almost see, I see like creatures in the mist when I envision this sentence. So this one was a little harder for you guys. We only had about a 44% accuracy rate on this one. So this one has some real life applications. So I definitely want to make sure you understand some of the subtle differences here. So we know right away we can extract some of the key aspects. 500 million different species have appeared on Earth, and 99% of these have vanished. So let me ask you this. Can you infer that the total number of species that have ever appeared on Earth is 500 million? From reading this sentence, can we infer that the totality of species, that total number that have ever appeared on Earth is 500 million? I want you to think about that. Read through this sentence. Think about that meaning. Can we infer meaning-wise? The total number of species that have appeared on Earth is 500 million. There's that poll. You can answer in the poll. I'll give you guys about 30 seconds to think about this meaning. There's some inferencing that has to happen here. At the same time, no, I just want you to think about, from this sentence, do you ensure that the total number of species, and that's a good question, at the same time, do I mean that they have appeared at the same time? No, over the course of time. From the sentence, do we get the totality? Yes, over the course of time. Do we get the sense that that's the totality of the number? And that's a very important meaning piece that you're pulling there that we need to think about with this sentence. We're going to talk about that because that plays in. Okay, about 5 more seconds. Okay, hopefully here you answered yes, right? Because we do get the sense of that over the course of time, 500 million species over the course of the existence of the Earth, that this is the number of species that have appeared, right? That meaning does come across, all right? So I want to give you a reference sentence to think about because there's some differences in our answer choices. So when I give you the sentence, only 30% of 1,000 students who have completed the inference module have excelled in the final post-session exercise. I want you to think about this question, okay? In this sentence, our universe, or our totality, is 1,000 students, right? So the inference, the total universe here is 1,000 students. Now compare that to, of 1,000 students who completed the inference module, only 30% have excelled in the final post-session exercise. Now think about the difference here. In this sentence, we have a set of 1,000 students. We don't get the same sense that we get in the first sentence, okay? Of 1,000 students, we get a set versus a total universe or a complete number. So that slight wording change completely changes the meaning being communicated. Okay, so the second sentence gives us a sampling or a piece, where the first sentence gives us a totality or a total number. Okay? But doesn't totality include all possible organisms? We just have to go with what we're presented. So we're not going to go with like adding our outside information. We don't want to overthink the sentence. We say species, so we're going to stick with species. Don't overthink what's being communicated. Okay. Now, choice A, 500 million different species of living creatures have appeared on Earth. That gives us a sense of totality, that over the course of time, the totality or the total number is that 500 million, all right? Where in choice B, we get nearly 99% of 500 million. So choice B gives us that difference in meaning being communicated, that we get a sampling or a part of that 500 million. So choice B doesn't communicate that same totality that we get with choice A. Okay? And choice A, why do I say that it gives me that completion in choice A? Because 500 million different species of living creatures have appeared. So I get over that course of time, that number has appeared. I don't give of 500 million, which gives me a part of 500 million. So this of 500 million, this part right here gives me a portion of 500 million, right? Is if I was to say my class has 37 students, and of those 37 students, 22 of you answered the question correctly, I get a set or a sampling, right? So when we see that difference in wording, we get a partial number. So a set or a sampling is very different than a total number. Very different meaning. And that slight wording change changes the meaning and the intended story being told. This makes a big difference in the real world when we're telling the story with numbers or money or anything like that. Okay? So take a look at choice B. Okay? We still can't infer in choice B. And I know some of you are like, get rid of the polls. This is the only way I have to interact with you guys on YouTube because the chat's delayed. So to keep us moving, we have to use the polls in order to get your answers, okay? So from choice B, can you still infer that 500 million is the total number of species that have appeared on Earth? Look at choice B really carefully. Or can you see that it's that set now that we've discussed that sample sentence? I'll give you guys about 10, 15 seconds. Look at the wording carefully. Look at how that's being expressed and how the author is communicating that meaning. I'm dropping lots of hints. All right. Hopefully you guys all agree with me that no, you cannot, okay? Thank you. No, you cannot say that this is the totality, all right? So choice B is a meaning distortion. So if you landed on choice B, you missed that subtle meaning change that's being communicated and that change in the story that's being expressed. All right, and we have to look for those meaning changes. And this is a big change in the story, a set versus a sampling. Okay. So, and we can't go with maybe a billion species, but we have 500 million. We have to go with what's being presented in the sentence, right? And in this sentence and in the wording we're presented, and we're dealing with a completely underlined sentence here, so we have to go with this micro story that we're being presented. Okay, so, and we're not going to deal with what ifs and if we had had this and if we had that. We don't have time with GMAT to deal with what ifs. We have, 90 seconds to deal with what the author has presented us. So we need to look at what we have. And what we have, and I'm not trying to dismiss your questions, because we have a zillion different what if scenarios we could have. All right. This whole thing could change if it was worded slightly differently. Absolutely. Right. But the way that the author has communicated this sentence, the meaning is completely changed based on this meaning distortion. And we have to be able to recognize that change in the story and that change in communication. We could change the story 50 different ways depending on who wrote the sentence. Absolutely. Okay. So let's look at the rest of these answer choices. So choice A, we're going to reject because vanishing is an incorrect expression of the verb tense. Because when we use the word vanishing, this is a continuous, kind of like a progressive action. It almost presents the imagery to us as if we can watch them vanishing as we speak, right? As it's ongoing, right? You almost get this imagery as like they're vanishing into the mist. Okay, it doesn't give us that past, present perfect tense of that they have vanished over the course of time. It means that they're vanishing before our eyes. So we're rejecting choice A on those grounds. Choice B, we're rejecting for that meaning distortion that we just spent all that time discussing, because that's where a lot of students slightly miss choice B. Also, the use of that appeared in choice B can also be considered a deterministic error, because that appeared here indicates that, boom, these creatures appeared all at once. And it gives us that meaning that, these living creatures appeared all at the same time. And that is also a meaning distortion. Choice C, we are going to reject again because we have that appeared, which is going to communicate that instantaneous, all these creatures appeared at one time. So this is an incorrect communication here that we are going to dismiss, okay? And that's not working for us. Choice D, if you look at the structure here of 500 million different species of living creatures that have appeared on Earth, nearly 99% of them have vanished. So I want you to look at the parallel structure that we have there, okay? Because the structure in choice D is, again, giving us this sampling, so to speak. So we have this redundancy of the prepositions, which is really annoying to me. So of the 500 million, so again, we get that set or that sampling. So of 100 apples, 80 are rotten. Okay, we could clearly say that instead of them. So we don't need that redundancy there. So this structure is really, really messy. It also is giving us that meaning distortion that we don't need. So choice E has our verb tenses all expressed properly. Okay, so of the 500 million different species of living creatures that have appeared, so this gives us that continuity over the course of time. These creatures have appeared on Earth. Nearly 99% have vanished. So over the course of time, nearly 99% of them have vanished. Okay, so we get that proper expression. Everything is making sense. We get that totality, okay, of everything happening. Choice E works perfectly, okay? All right, the sampling concept is the fact that we have a total number, okay? And that total number has appeared over the course of time. And then of that total number, 99% have vanished. All right, so a portion of that total number, which is that 99%, have vanished. Okay, so it's that complete number, 500 million. Of that 500 million, 99% have vanished. So hopefully that clarifies the meaning there. I saw someone asking about the verb ing modifier. I'm trying to focus on verbs, guys, and not modifiers. So thank you for answering each other's questions on extraneous things, okay? D is incorrect because of the expression here. So the use of the preposition of is really redundant. We have of the 500 million different species of living creatures, that works fine, but then we get nearly 99% of them have vanished. So that of them is redundancy. Okay, we don't need those redundant prepositions. That would be a redundancy expression error. The use of vanishing in A doesn't properly express over the course of time this has happened. We need have vanished to show the present perfect. This happens slowly over the course of time. Vanishing indicates that it's like we can see it happening now. That's not a proper verb expression. Okay. Yes, of the 500 million, because we're talking about of the total 500 million, 99% of that 500 million has vanished. See? That nearly. So of the 500 million, nearly 99% has vanished. So that gives us that piece that we want. So that's the communication. Okay. All right. You guys, if you're puzzled by this is an official question. I'm going to move on to question 3 just in the sake of time. But this is an official question. So you can definitely ask questions to us about this later, and I will help you with your understanding, but I want to make sure that we keep moving because we've got lots of questions to handle. Yes, both have appeared and have vanished should be in the present perfect, not past perfect. All right, fundamental concepts here for our third question, phosphates. I want to make sure that you guys understand this. So choose the correct sentence here. Until a strict schedule was imposed, kids had been allowed to watch television for hours at a stretch. Or until a strict schedule was imposed, kids were allowed to watch television for hours at a stretch. We've got 2 sentences. One grouping is correct. One grouping is incorrect. Give you guys about a minute to let me know which grouping you think is correct or incorrect. About 30 seconds. Okay, I'm going to have Harsha lock that poll in. Let's talk about this. Okay, so sentence 1. Until a strict schedule was imposed, kids had been allowed to watch television for hours at a stretch. Joe asked Amy for a slice from the pizza that Amy had eaten. Or until a strict schedule was imposed, kids were allowed to watch television for hours at a stretch. Joe asked for a slice from the pizza that Amy was eating. So we definitely hear 80% of you chose sentence 2, which is great. That's what I wanted to see. Sentence 1, the logic you should have used is until a strict schedule was imposed, kids had been allowed. Now, the sense you should have gotten from had been allowed here is If something had been allowed, you should have asked yourself, is it still allowed? I had been allowed to eat gluten until I went to visit the doctor. Now, if I say that to you, do you get the sense that I'm still allowed to eat gluten? Your head's probably going, oh, she can't eat pizza anymore because she can't have gluten. Okay? So if I say had been allowed, you're registering I'm no longer allowed. So the story I'm telling you about the doctor taking gluten away from me is registering you that I'm no longer allowed to do that. Okay? So here, kids had been allowed. So it should have been registering to you that, well, you know, why would they impose something that they're a schedule on something they're no longer allowed to do? That doesn't make sense, right? Similarly, Joe asked for a slice from the pizza that Amy had eaten. Well, if you walk up and the pizza's gone, why would you ask for something that Amy had already pigged out on and wasn't there anymore? That doesn't make any sense, okay? So sentence 2 properly says, until a strict schedule was imposed, kids were allowed. Everything in the past tense, right? The strict schedule was imposed, kids were allowed, everything past tense. Joe asked for a slice from the pizza that Amy was eating, okay? So she was in the process of eating it. There was still pizza left. He asked for a slice, okay? If she had eaten it, event 1 had already occurred. It was over and done with. The pizza was gone. Joe, the second event, asking for a slice, pointless, okay? So we need to make sure and keep this in mind as we're exploring our next question. So sentence 2, absolutely correct. Sentence 1, illogical storytelling going on, okay? So intent to tell a story with multiple events, the meaning relating these events and sequencing them correctly, and the reasoning, because they're on multiple in the same timeline, they're within the same story. When we have multiple events in the same story that are related to each other, we need to use the past perfect. And when we use the past perfect, we're going to use the past perfect for event number 1 to sequence the first event, okay? So that being said, let's take a look at this question on phosphates. In 1972 agreement, so I know right away this agreement was in 1972. This agreement is between Canada and the United States. So yes, had been allowed and had eaten are past perfect. Reduced the amount of phosphates. So now I know what this agreement between these two countries did. It reduced the amount of phosphates that municipalities had been allowed to dump into the Great Lakes. So here are my key aspects. It reduced the amount of phosphates allowed to be dumped into the Great Lakes. So here's the question. Same question I asked in that fundamental concept. What sense do you get from had been allowed? What sense do we get here? From the use of this past perfect, had been allowed. Think of me telling you, I had been allowed to eat gluten. What sense do you get? Are they still allowed? I want you to take a second, think about this. They were no longer allowed, right? They're no longer allowed to dump, okay? So that being said, this action happened and got replaced by some other action, all right? So if we have had been allowed and that communication is, okay, this action happened and something else has replaced it, does it make sense to use this past perfect here? And then I ask the question, well, how can I reduce something? How can this treaty or this agreement between these two countries reduce the amount of something that you're no longer allowed to dump? If they had been allowed to dump it and they're no longer allowed to dump it, how can we reduce something? This story is illogical. These events are completely illogical. Okay, so now my verbs are illogical and my story's not making sense. When I get sentences like this, I think of my confused grandfather telling me stories where his events get all messed up and they start to be illogical, and I have to start sorting them out myself. Okay, and then we have errors. Okay, so the use here of the past perfect is incorrect because we can't reduce something that has already stopped being done. Okay, so hopefully everybody's seeing that clearly. So let's move through these answer choices. Okay. Choice A is incorrect because we have this had been allowed, which doesn't make sense. And choice B, also incorrect for the same reason. Had been dumping communicates basically the same thing. Had been dumping tells me that people are no longer dumping, right? So how can we reduce something that people are no longer doing? Now, choice C definitely corrects, okay? And it tells us have been allowed. But we know when we use the past perfect, the formula is the past perfect, municipalities have been allowed. So that gives us the continuous action, right? That they have been allowed to do this over the course of time. And now that's being reduced. But notice here, we have reduces. And when we use the past perfect, we have to use the past tense with it. So, and we know reduced, and we don't have the past perfect here. Actually, we have the present perfect, but reduced is the proper past tense because our agreement is in 1972. So reduces is not the proper verb tense because that's the present tense, and we can't use present tense with an agreement that happened in 1972. That's illogical. Okay, so choice C is incorrect for the use of the present tense reduces. We would need reduced there. Choice D is indeed our correct answer. And 61% of you landed on this, so nice job here. That's a pretty solid accuracy rate for working our way through verbs. We have reduced the amount of phosphates that municipalities are allowed to dump. Now, some students get confused with the use of are allowed. This is fine because it tells us that we are now allowed to dump. So there's nothing contextually here that tells us that this agreement has been changed or that this law no longer exists. So for all we know, this is the current law and that municipalities are still allowed to do this. So the use of are allowed is 100% okay here. So choice D is indeed the correct answer choice. And choice E, again, incorrect because of the use of reduces, and we can't use the present tense for it, again, for an agreement that took place in 1972. So we're going to reject choice E on that error. So choice D is indeed our correct answer here. Okay, so I had been allowed to eat pizza before visiting the doctor. Well, I would say I was allowed because visiting there isn't being used as a verb. I was allowed to eat pizza before visiting the doctor. So you're not sequencing. Okay. So if I say the 1972 agreement between the United States and Canada reduced the amounts of phosphates that municipalities are allowed to dump, right? So the agreement that happened in the past reduced what we are currently allowed to do. Okay, it tells that story from history to what we are allowed to do over into the present. Okay. Yeah, that does change the meaning again a little bit. We're allowed to dump. We would need something contextually to tell us that the treaty, no longer exists or something. Then contextually, we don't have anything like that here. Again, I don't like to live in what ifs, and we don't have that option here, but that wouldn't be incorrect because the usage would work. The whole thing being in past tense would work if we had something within the context of the sentence to make that proper. Okay? All right. We only have about 30 minutes left. I want to make sure you guys get everything in that you are here to get in. So the takeaway from Sprint 1, visualize the events in your mind and determine the nature of the events as intended by the author. See what story the author is intending to communicate. Check the verbs. Are the verbs communicating that story? Is it presenting the events the way the author intended. You only have the information presented to you by the author. That's what you're dealing with. Don't infer too much there. Okay, your takeaways. Here's a quick snapshot. Question 1 was a fact. Question 2 expresses all, not a sample. Question 3, the action was not completed or replaced. The expression, the income tax increased from A to B by a specific time. 500 million species have appeared on Earth over that course of time. Municipalities still allowed to dump when the agreement was reached. Okay, so again, it doesn't make sense to reduce something they're no longer allowed to do. So we needed to make sure that they were still allowed to do it when it was reduced. Your verb tenses here, vanishing species, the proper use of that present perfect, have appeared and have vanished over the course of time. Simple past tense, okay, the income taxes, that stop date, we saw that hard stop in 2002, so we knew we needed that use of that simple past tense. And past perfect, we haven't seen a proper use of the past perfect yet where we've needed to sequence those events. So guess what we're going to get into now? We're going to get into a little bit of past perfect. All right, so let's get started. So actually, I'm not sure what you mean by 2, but we're going to go to sprint 2. Hopefully that's what you mean. So that time I'm not going to go back. What if it was reduced in option C? If we replaced the present tense with the past tense, if that was the only error, then yes, absolutely, it was probably correct. But again, we're not going to see 2 grammatically correct sentences with GMAT. There's always going to be that deterministic error. I'm not answering any more what-if questions. Understand the verb tenses. Do not memorize the formula, okay? There are so many verb rules, grammar rules. You guys can't function in a world where you just memorize rules. You can only remember so much on test day. So using the meaning-based storytelling approach when you're dealing with SC and how the author is telling the story is going to really help you work through. Understand these usages, how it communicates the voice of the story, how it sequences the events of the story is going to be easier than memorizing a formula. Grab the supplemental lessons available through this Saturday only. You can register at that link that just popped up. It's only available through Saturday. It'll get you jump started on this free trial in this whole area of verbs and really understanding the verbs and seeing kind of where you're at with your verbs. Also, this Saturday, June 5th, our founder, Rajette, is hosting a CR webinar, so you definitely want to register for that. He is the master. He will take you guys through all of these steps. He will get you in this webinar from a very basic level up to that 700 level in 2 hours. He will be teaching pre-thinking, how to approach and ace the CR section. He will be working with all 700 level questions. You will get to 100% accuracy in under 2 minutes. Be working with how to apply the negotiation test and discuss your most common faltering points that he's seen, and he's worked with thousands of students. He is the real expert. So make sure you get in on that if you are available. Also coming on Sunday is a great webinar with one of our quant experts, Shweta. She's wonderful. So if you want to jumpstart your algebra studies, this would be something definitely to get involved in. Shweta is one of our best SMEs in quant, so you definitely want to join her, and you can register for that also by clicking on the link that Harsha just popped up. And with that being said, there are the things you will get out of the algebra webinar: the basics of inequalities, absolute values, common questions asked on the GMAT, learn how to solve those 700 level questions, new approaches to solve questions, different ways to think about the questions, and again, those common faltering points that we see with so many students, especially dealing with inequalities. So make sure you register for that for this Sunday, June 7th. And my favorite thing is the personalized study plans we have to offer. Our strategy team is absolutely amazing at planning personalized study plans to help students excel. They have so many data points, over 1,000 data points that they look at to see where students need to focus and what students need to do. So find a mentor, click on that link that is in the chat and schedule an appointment. Slots go really, really quickly. So you definitely want to make sure you register as soon as possible to get your spot. It's an amazing team. I can't sing their praises enough. Okay, with all that being said, you are going to put your answers in the polls, not the chat again. This sprint has 2 questions. I am going to give you 2 minutes each, so 4 minutes, because we are running out of time and I want to make sure we have time to discuss them. So as soon as Harsha gets that in the chat, there it is. Click on the link and ready, set, solve. Thirty seconds remaining. Okay guys, 10-second warning, lock in those final answers. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm gonna have Harsha shut that poll down. All right. I am getting pinged from all sides that we are on a time crunch, and I want to be able to get through these last 2 questions with you. So that being said, I'm going to talk through the fundamental concepts. I'm going to stop the intermediary polls and all of that stuff and just work you guys through that and work through the solutions for you, just so I can get these explanations to you, okay? I'd rather get you more questions than have to cut you short. So here we go. Okay, why is this not? There we go. So our first question was on the magpie attacks. Our second question, Michelangelo. Both very different questions. Hopefully you saw the commonality of the sequencing of events here. So let's take a look at the magpie events. Step 1, read slowly, extract the meaning. Really understand the story the author is intending to communicate, okay? So the first detailed study of magpie attacks in Australia indicates that. So we have a story telling us about what a study is telling us about these magpie attacks, which are these awful little birds in Australia. And this study indicates that by the time they had reached adulthood, 98% of men and 75% of women born in the country, so born in Australia, have been attacked by the birds, which sounds awful because I'm scared of birds, and these birds are like these little flitty things at your face. They're terrible. So that sounds horrible. Okay, so I understand the meaning pretty much. So I'm asking myself, I have multiple events, and as I said, when we have multiple events, as we did with the James Baldwin question back at that fundamental concept, I like timelines. I like to organize my events. So I have my 2 events, attacked by the birds and reached adulthood. So I need to make sure that my events are properly sequenced. So I want you to ask yourself, and you should be thinking as you're working through the question independently, is there any ambiguity or confusion about the logical sequencing here? The first detailed study of magpie indicates that by the time they had reached adulthood, so I know right here that had reached adulthood uses the past perfect. So this is the past perfect of here. And that past perfect is used for the first event. So this would be event 1. 98% of men and 75% of women born in the country have been attacked by the birds. This is event 2. Now, is this the logical sequencing? Well, no, the ambiguity isn't there, right? That they were attacked by the time they reached adulthood, but my past perfect, my events should be switched here. So I have a meaning error and a verb tense error here, because we should have the past perfect with the other event to express the earlier of the 2 events, that they had been event. This is event 1 and then event 2, right? They had been attacked and then they reached adulthood. So the authors mixed their verb tenses up. So my grandpa's telling this story. He's mixed his events up, and we should have them reversed. So we need to look for a sentence that straightens these verb tenses out. Okay, so whenever I know I have confused verb tenses, I keep that timeline with me. I know event 1, that they are attacked by birds, and event 2, they reached adulthood. Okay, so choice A is incorrect because of these reversed verb tenses. Okay, choice B, I see the correct order. All right, I have had been attacked. So we have the correct use of the past perfect here to sequence this, but I see reach by the time they reach adulthood. Now, the second piece of the past perfect formula is to use the past tense. So we have to use the past perfect plus the simple past tense. So this is going to be our error in option B because we don't have the simple past tense. So we're going to reject choice B because we don't have the past tense verb. okay? Now let's take a look at choice C. Is there anything wrong with this choice? By the time they reached adulthood, so I have the simple past tense, check, 98% of men and 75% of women born in the country had been attacked by the birds, okay? Nothing wrong here. Our verb tenses check out, okay? This is correct, proper sequencing of event. I can check it with my timeline above. Everything is sequenced properly, properly communicated. So it looks like we're good to go, but I'm going to reject the rest of my answer choices on solid ground, okay? Choice D, 98% of men and 75% of women that were born in the country were attacked by the birds by the time they reach adulthood. Now here we have verb error. That's first and foremost, right? Because we have reach, which again should be in the past tense, and it should be reached. And then we have that were born in the country and were attacked. So here we have a situation, were attacked by the time they reached, are attacked by the time they reach. So we have like the were attacked is working fine, but the use of that here is problematic because that should not be referring to men and women. So we have an error that's not a verb tense error introduced, and we have reach, which is past tense, is not past tense, so we can reject on that ground. But were attacked is fine, okay? So we're going to reject D on those grounds, okay? Now, if you're asking yourself, well, why can we use were attacked and why would reached be okay? Remember what I said earlier. By the time here is a time marker, okay? It's a sequencing marker. So when we have sequencing markers, it makes the past perfect optional. So we could just use were attacked by the birds by the time they reach. So we could just use two simple past tense verbs and it would be okay because we have that time marker right there and that clarifies the sequencing. But we have these other errors introduced, okay? So we can't go with that here. Now, choice E. Look here, the verbs are fine. We have had been attacked, that checks out, okay, and were born, checks out. But this modifier, by the time they reached adulthood, is what we call a squinting modifier. It's really confusing what this modifier is modifying. By the time they reached adulthood, is this modifying had been attacked, or is this modifier modifying were born in the country? Were they born in the country by the time they reached adulthood, or had they been attacked by the time they reached adulthood? Again, and not a verb error, but we also have to check, even if they get our verbs correct, have any other errors been introduced? And here, that modifier error has been introduced in the sentence. So choice C is indeed our correct answer here. About 53% of you landed on this answer choice, which is good because, I mean, I would love it to be 83%, but 53% accuracy, not bad for just starting with verbs. The past perfect is a difficult concept. This is the most challenging concept for students. These events were needing to be sequenced. They were related. They did occur on the same timeline. So we either needed that clear sequencing marker or the use of the past perfect. You can have both, and that just gives us extra clarity, and that is perfectly fine, totally logically correct, and grammatically correct as well, okay? So let's move on to Michelangelo. This is another hard question. The fundamental concept here, and I'm just going to work our way through this. Joe worked at a company that had been established in 1965. Joe worked at a company that was established in 1965, and I want you to take a beat. Think to yourself, which of these sentences is correct? If you want to pop in the chat, go ahead. I'm going to give you like 10 seconds. Maybe the delay will be kind to us and your answers will pop up quickly. But I want you to take a beat, like 10 seconds. Which one of these is correct? And this was the hardest question of the day for you guys, so I definitely want to make sure I get through this one. Joe worked at the company that had been established in 1965, or Joe worked at the company that was established? 2, 2, 2, 1. Okay. Good. I like a little debate. All right, let's talk about this. So in sentence 1, Joe worked at a company that had been established in 1965. So we get 1, that the company had been established, and that 2, Joe worked at the company. So obviously Joe's not that old. The company was established first, makes sense, and then Joe worked there. Okay, obviously the company has to be established before Joe could work there. So that's logical. But here's my question. Are these events related? And that's the question you have to ask yourself. Does the company being established have anything to do? Don't change your answers. You guys have to be confident in your answers. Don't change them just because I'm discussing it. You have to ask yourself this. Are these events related? Does Joe working at this company have anything to do with the company being established? Do you think the company established itself and said, hey, I'm going to build this company so Joe can work here? That's like Rajette and Pyle establishing eGMAT and saying, hey, I'm going to make eGMAT so Stacey can come work for us. Not, right? My coming to work for eGMAT had nothing to do with them establishing the company. All right. 2 totally different timelines. Joe worked in a company or at a company that was established in 1965. Yes, are these events correlated? Absolutely. But are they related? No. So the correct sentence is actually sentence number 2, because we do not have related events. Correlated events are not related events, and that is really key for you to keep in mind, okay? Because just because someone works someplace and the company was established doesn't mean the events were related, all right? For all we know, the company was established in 1965. Joe didn't start working there until yesterday. So the establishment of the company and Joe's employment have nothing to do with each other. 2 totally separate timelines. If Joe leaves the company, do you think the company's going to close? Absolutely not. One event has nothing to do with the other. Therefore, the events do not need to be sequenced because they are not related. Thus, the use of the past perfect is incorrect. So when you see the use of the past perfect, you have to ask, is the author communicating related events? Yes, does the sequencing kind of make sense on a timeline? Yeah, it makes sense. The company has to be established before someone can get a job there. But are the events related? That's the second question. And here the answer to that is no. And if you can't answer yes to both of those questions, do not use the past perfect. Use the simple past tense. Okay? So let's take a look at Michelangelo, because this is a really hard question. Only 25% of you got it right. So this is the way GMAT gets you with these questions. Michelangelo, the great sculptor, it is believed, had made his sculpture of David, amazing sculpture if you ever get a chance to see it, using an 8-inch plaster model that was recently discovered after being lost for nearly 300 years. So again, I said key aspects, we go through, we get the meaning, right? To get to that meaning when we're dealing with verbs and dealing with a story that's being communicated to us, I often ask myself leading questions. So I say, what is the belief? Michelangelo made David's sculpture using this model, okay? What was recently discovered? My answer, the 8-inch model. What was lost? The 8-inch model. Okay, I have my key points. Is had made the appropriate verb tense? All right, he had made the model. That's the first event. All right, and then the sculpture was recently discovered. Again, I'm thinking to myself, well, this was 300 years ago he made this. Does the discovery of the model 300 years later have anything to do with him sculpting the model 300 years ago? No. So the recent discovery has no bearing on the fact that he made it. He made the sculpture, dropped the model. He's dead and gone. 300 years later, we find it. One has nothing to do with the other. So the use of the past perfect is not correct. Okay? The PPT is blurred. I'm sorry. So choice A is wrong. Maybe it's getting tired. Hopefully it'll liven up. I'll try to be really articulate so you can understand me. Okay, choice B is going to be incorrect because we have a subject-verb error. If you look really closely at choice B, this option is actually stating that the model discovered something, which creates illogical meaning, okay? So an 8-inch plastic model is believed and recently discovered. So the model is believed and recently discovered. The model didn't discover itself. That meaning is completely illogical. All right. So we're rejecting choice B for illogical meaning. Take a look at choice C. An 8-inch plaster model believed to have been used by Michelangelo for a sculpture of David has been discovered. All works perfectly well. Now, students often reject this choice because of the passive voice and the structural change. Passive voice is perfectly fine to use. Some authors love to use it. This is a writer's choice. It is not automatically to be rejected on GMAT, and structural changes are allowed. There's nothing logically wrong with this choice, nor is there anything grammatically wrong. But we're going to reject D and E on solid ground. So let's look at choice D. If you look at choice D and you look at this clause here, that an 8-inch plaster model. So this is supposed to be a clause that is telling us about this belief, that an 8-inch plaster model, but the verb is missing from the clause. Okay, so that's the error we get there. There's a parallel sentence here. It is believed that the Empire State Building, which is a tall building, right? So there's that parallel sentence for you to kind of look at and see what is wrong with choice D. Choice E, we have a pronoun issue, it. So the verbs all work in choice E, but again, they've introduced another error with it. We don't know if it here is referring to the sculpture, David, or the model. We have lots of ambiguity with that pronoun. We also have it at the beginning of the sentence being used as a placeholder pronoun, and it in the middle of the sentence ambiguously referring to one of two entities, which creates a lot of ambiguity with that pronoun. So we can confidently reject that pronoun on those grounds. So choice C is indeed our correct answer because we do not want to relate these events using the past perfect. Okay, now, that all being said, if you're still uncomfortable with choice C because of the structural changes, there's choice D again with that missing verb. Lots of people have questions about that, so take a snapshot, look at that. I'm trying to get us out of here on time. Here's our correct choice. Notice the structure change to have been used by Michelangelo after having been lost for nearly 300 years. So this is a structure, but here is another OG question that just came out in OG 2022 that is a correct answer choice. So the good thing with structures with GMAT is they tend to repeat themselves. So once you see a structure and you get comfortable with that structure, you get comfortable with that verb usage telling the story, you will see these repeated patterns. So here we see Neanderthals appear to have been equipped. So you see that repeated structure, you see that repeated verb usage. Everything is all good, okay? So get comfortable with changes of structure, get comfortable with these verb tenses telling these stories. Make sure you can determine what is correlated versus what is actually related, all right? Your learning path moving forward, continue to revise and analyze and really build up your understanding of the meaning-based storytelling approach, how to use those verbs to express that meaning, to sequence those events, to tell that story. Use that free trial to help you learn how to do a thorough meaning analysis, get through that error analysis, and do not reject choices without a solid reasoning. Make sure you understand what mistake is the author making telling the story with those verbs before you reject an answer choice. Your next step is obviously to click on that link and register for that free trial. Use that meaning, storytelling. It is not just about grammar. Grammar is simply a tool to express the meaning and to communicate the story. Storytelling and meaning has to come first. You're more than welcome for the session. I hope it was helpful to you. I hope that you got a few takeaways that you can use to help you improve with verbs and understand how to communicate the meaning better. Don't forget that free trial. It's available through Saturday, June 5th. Don't forget to sign up for the master's session on critical reasoning this Saturday. Yes, you can absolutely send me an email. All our emails are easy, Stacey@eGMAT.com. I'd be more than happy to take your emails. I love working with students. I'm a teacher at heart. I miss teaching. I am teaching. This is teaching, so I don't miss teaching, but I miss working with students face-to-face. So sure, shoot me an email, okay? Make sure, here's everything you'll get from Master Rajet's webinar, so make sure you sign up for that. He is a master teacher at CR. And make sure you sign up for Shweta's algebra webinar. You won't get a more beautiful mathematician than Shweta to take you through the algebra concepts. There's where you'll get from that. And as I said, our Rockstar GMAT team, personalized study plans, so much data at their fingertips to help you master your preparations and really focus where you need to spend your time. And with that, I think I am done. And I think I'm done on time. So thank you all so very, very much. Please make sure you practice. Shoot us any questions that you have. We are here to help. And I wish you the best of luck with your eGMAT journey or your GMAT journey. And again, a shout out to GC Club for hosting us today. Happy learning.